What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is a story where Izuku had the abilities of Tempest Rimuru. Young Midoriya was born with a quirk slime, growing up a slime, he must now learn what it means to be a hero and carry on the legacy of the #1 hero. Basically, Izuku has the abilities of Rimuru from that time I got reincarnated as a slime. But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more informations and support the amazing author MasterRevan for writing this story. Now, let's get into the story. Chapter 1. A heroic slime appears. Stop a catchin', you're hurting him. A young green-haired boy, Izuku Midoriya begged, standing in front of another smaller boy, his eyes dripping with tears as he nervously stood his former friend and his two cronies down. Really, Deku? You think someone like you can tell me what to do? Yelled the enraged blonde Bakugo Katsuki as he pointed a hand at the green-haired child. Izuku swallowed nervously, subconsciously moving to take a step back, only to look at the cowering child behind him and take a step forwards, eyes full of both fear and determination. Izuku's gaze made Bakugo narrow his eyes, an explosion popping on his hand as he and his cronies charged at Izuku. Just as Bakugo moved to slam his palm into Izuku's stomach, there was a pause as Izuku seemed to melt, his clothing falling to the floor as the bullies and cowering child stared at where he'd been standing. Deku? Bakugo asked, looking at the clothing on the floor, taking a step back, the clothing moving as a small round shape extracted itself from its clothing prison. The color was green, not that different from the color of Izuku's hair. Is that a slime? Asked the formerly cowering boy who could only stare as the green ball began to move. Bakugo stared at the now identified green slime, which was most definitely the green-haired boy he called useless, with disbelief. What the F? Okay, today we would usually discuss your futures. Started a teacher eyeing his class with a serious look that quickly morphed into a wide smile as he threw the papers in his hands into the air. But, I can already tell you all want to be heroes. He shouted as the class cheered. The cheering quickly ended as a now teenage Bakugo Katsuki slammed his hand into his desk, making it explode as he did so. Don't lump me in with these rejects. He shouted, not the center of attention. I'm the only one here who's going to make it as #1 pro. He yelled, ignoring the groans from the rest of the class as the teacher looked at some notes on his desk. Oh, Bakugo, you're planning for the hero course at UA as well as Midoriya, correct? He asked as the students began to mutter about the prestige of UA as Bakugo let out a growl, looking to the back of the room where a slightly bigger slime sat on the desk, two tendril appendages, letting it use a pencil as it wrote into a notebook, ignoring what was happening. Deku? Yelled the blonde, getting its attention as he stood with a bang as he made his way to the slime's desk, slamming his hand on the edges of the desk, burning it slightly with an explosion as he glared at the slime. What makes you think a nobody like you could be a hero with such a shitty quirk? He yelled. The slime, like the rest of the class, sided at the usual side of Bakugo, yelling at Izuku, some of the girls in the class quickly moving to pick up Izuku as the others stared at Bakugo with a look of disgust. Just because you've got a flashy quirk and he doesn't mean anything. The girl that held him said, hugging the slime close as another joined in. You're just pissed Midoriya is more well-liked than you. Bakugo glared at most of the females in the class who rushed to Izuku's defense, the teacher letting out a sigh. Bakugo, no quirk use in class. He said before looking at the girl hugging the Izuku slime close to her chest. And please return Midoriya to his seat. He said with a now tired voice as he tried to steer the class back on track. Izuku the slime let out a sigh, or at least the closest he could as a slime, his form jiggling slightly as he made his way through the narrow streets of the city, making his way home. Maybe I should eat his school supplies again till he stops being so aggressive. He thought, making the sound of laughing as he remembered the look on his bully's face back when the middle school had first started and he had eaten his supplies for a week before getting the blonde to relent, at least slightly. Well, it's not like he can hurt me with his explosions anymore. He thought, remembering before his slime quirk had activated about how much Katsuki's explosions had hurt and now they couldn't even singe him. He gave the slime equivalent of a sigh as he made his way through an underpass, pausing as his sight, which was now 360 degrees, saw a shadow appear above him, rolling with an agility that would surprise his classmates. He made his way away from the now identified slime man, his body a more robust green. Damn it. The slime man said, rushing towards Izuku, who kept dodge rolling. The man struggled to try and catch him in a slimy game of cat and mouse that was quickly ended as a sewer grate a couple of feet away from them exploded from the ground as a massive man crawled out of the manhole, both slimes pausing at the mountain of a man grinned. Worry not, dear citizen. He shouted, making them both freeze at his gaze, Izuku in awe and the slime man in fear. For I am here. He said, and with a punch sent both slimes flying, Izuku into a wall of the overpass, while the slime man exploded into puddles that covered the floor, walls, and ceiling. The man smiled at the defeated villain only to widen as he noticed a small ball of green slime that slammed into the wall with enough force to know a normal person. Crap. Though quickly making his way to the small slime, scooping the slime villain into a bottle as he did so with extreme speed. "Hey, kid, are you okay?" the man asked, poking the round slime, leaving a small indent that made him start to sweat as he quickly tried to pat the slime down. "You're All Might," yelled Izuku, his voice rising to a pitch that made All Might wince at the noise. "Sorry," Izuku muttered as he moved in place, his slime body jiggling in excitement. "It's just your All Might," he said in awe as the number one hero let out a sigh of relief that what he assumed to be a kid was okay. "Could you sign my notebook?" the slime asked, a notebook popping out his body, held up by a tendril as well as a pin. The massive man quickly signed them, handing them back to the slime, watching with interest as they were absorbed into his body. Noticing All Might's look, Izuku let out a chuckle, using one of the tendrils to sheepishly rub the back of his head. "I can absorb and store objects inside my stomach, as well as break down objects to their base materials," he explained, as the number one hero gave him a nod before turning away. "Well, I best be going now," he said, slipping the bottle containing the slime villain into one of his pockets, giving the slime a thumbs up with a smile. "Farewell, young man." "Wait," Izuku said as All Might crouched to jump away, sticking himself onto the man's leg using his tendrils as the man jumped away. "Hey kid, let go," he said, looking at the shaking slime now attached to his leg. "But, I have something I want to ask you," Midoriya yelled over the rushing wind, pausing for a second. "And I've never fallen from this high before. I don't know if I did from this height." All Might groaned as he reached a hand down to hold the slime against his leg, blood dripping out from between his lips as he winced in pain. "Shit, this is bad," he thought, whipping the blood with his free arm as he spotted a building with an open rooftop to land on. "I'm running on fumes here, need to ditch the kid before my time's up," he thought with another wince as Izuku jumped from his leg onto the roof. "Sorry kid, but I have something I have to do and I can't stick around to humor you today." He turned to face away from the slime, preparing for another jump. "Knock on the door and I'm sure someone will let you in to use the stairs." "Wait. Can a slime like me be a hero like you?" Izuku asked, making All Might pause at the desperation he felt from the slime. "I mean, I know I can be useful, carrying supplies and such during disasters, even fight if I have to. But I want to be a hero like you. Someone who inspires everyone, someone who saves everyone without fear," he said with admiration. "Without fear?" All Might warily thought as he turned to the kid just as steam started to come off his body, the number one hero cursing as he couldn't keep his current form going, steam exploding from his body as Izuku rolled back. The steam began to dissipate, revealing instead of the mountain of a man that had become the number one hero, a frail skeletal-looking man, eyes sunken in and a pale complexion, his thin state insinuated by the clothes that now baggily hang on his frame. "What happened to All Might?" Izuku said, in shock. "I am All Me," the skeleton man went to explain, only for blood to shoot out of his mouth as he started to cough. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked in concern at his coughing, trying to control the sheer shock at what he was seeing. "I'm fine," the man said after a couple of moments, wiping the blood from his mouth as he looked at Izuku with worry eyes. "As I was saying, I'm All Might." "But..." Izuku tried to come up with a reason that the situation was impossible. "Sorry kid, but this is the real me," the man said, taking a seat on the roof, back against its railing as he looked over to Izuku. "As you can guess, this is a secret kept from the average civilian, with only a few know about this situation. So don't go spreading this around," he said. "What happened to you?" Izuku asked, finally getting control over his thoughts. 5 years ago I fought against a villain that resulted in the loss of my stomach and damage to my respiratory system," he said, lifting his shirt to reveal a massive scar on his side. "Due to that, my body had degraded to the point that you see now, I'm only able to be a hero for 3 hours a day any longer, and I revert to this form," he said. "Was it the fight against Toxic Chainsaw?" Izuku asked. "You know your stuff, kind," the man said with a dry chuckle, lowering his shirt. "No, it was a fight with a villain I would rather not let the public know about, done in total secrecy, with the help of the Japanese government to cover it up and make sure news of it never reached the light of day," he said, as Izuku moved his body in a way similar to a nod. "Now you ask if a slime like you could be a hero," All Might said, standing as he looked at Izuku, eyes studying the slime. "I think you could, but let me tell you something. That smile you call fearless. It masks the fear I feel every time I go out on patrol." He looked over out at city around them. "To be a hero means more than glory or being number one." He looked at his hand, clenching it into a fist before looking at the Izuku, a small smile on his face. "Keep chasing your dream, kid. But don't forget that being a hero is more than what they say in the media." He gave Izuku a nod before patting his pocket. "Now I've got to get th." He paused, eyes wide as he emptied his pocket out, revealing no bottle. Where did? Izuku tried to say, only for them both to notice an explosion in the distance, All Might quickly dashing the door as Izuku latched himself back onto the man's leg without a second thought, knowing that he'd never make it in time on his own, guilt eating away at him. Oh no. Izuku muttered from his position on top of the sign that All Might was leaning against. Following the explosions, the hero and slime duo found themselves looking at the familiar slime villain, as fires and explosions raged on the street, heroes moving to control the scene, but none moving to stop the villain. It's my fault, it's my fault. Both thought, watching as the slime villain rampaged. They could hear the civilians clattered around the police line talking. Did you hear he's got a hostage? Yeah, it's some kind, I think he's the one making the explosions. If I hadn't clung to All Might. Izuku thought, watching as the slime villain moved, his mind stopping as he saw a familiar shade of blonde as the slime villain turned towards the crowd, revealing his hostage to be Bakugo Katsuki. Hachin. Izuku thought with wide eyes, his slime body moving without thought as he rolled between the legs of the crowd, rushing through them as fast as he could, and under the hero standing in front of the crowd, idly noting them yelling at him. Not you again. The slime villain yelled, trying to smash Izuku with his tendrils only for him to dodge roll, hitting a piece of rubble and flying into the air, stretching himself out, so that two tendrils pulled on Bakugo, while another wrapped around a sign trying to drag the blonde out. Eku. Bakugo said with a mix of anger and surprise, as he was pulled a bit from the villain's grasp, leaving his mouth free. I don't need your help. I can't let you die, Kachin. Izuku yelled, pulling harder as Bakugo struggled hard, the slime villain letting out a laugh. Just die. The slime villain yelled, bringing his tendril down with enough force to crack pavement, the heroes and crowd letting out shouts as Izuku kept pulling on Bakugo, ignoring the tendril drifting closer to him, an explosion going off as the street was filled with dust. I am really pathetic. All Might said as the dust cleared, holding the tendril back as his other hand pulled Bakugo free, sending him and Izuku stumbling to the ground. And after I tried to lecture you about what it meant to be hero. He pulled his arm back, sent parts of the slime flying as he formed a punch. Now let me show you my resolve. Detroit smash. He yelled, punching the slime villain with enough force to create gale force winds, turning him into puddles on the ground as the air pressure from his punch went off into the sky, turning the clear sky into a cloudy one. Rain began to fall from them. The crowd, heroes and two teens stared in shock at All Might's power to change the weather with one punch. The silence was only broken as the crowd broke into cheers, with All Might raising a fist into the air as Izuku made himself scarce, slinking off as the media and crowd gathered around the symbol of peace. Izuku's slime body shook slightly as he let out an internal groan, watching Bakugo's back as he walked away after spending a good 5 minutes yelling at the slime for saving him. Could have at least thanked me. He muttered to himself as he started his long trek home. Young slime. The familiar voice of All Might shouted, coming out from behind a corner, in his buff form once again. You-ha. He started to say something only to shrink back down to his skeletal form, blood flowing from his mouth for a second as he coughed. Oh my. The slime tried to speak only for the number one hero to hold up a hand, wiping the blood from his chin. Young slime, you seriously impressed me with your willingness to help that young man captured in that slime villain's grasp. He smiled a sad smile, bowing his head slightly. I apologize that I put you in such a position where that was necessary. You don't have to apologize. A flustered Izuku said, his slime body moving side to side. I mean, if I hadn't grabbed onto you. I can't accept an apology from this old man, can you, kid? All Might said. You're not old, All Might. Izuku poked two tendrils together. I mean, no one really knows your age, or your quirk, or your actual na. The slime was silenced as All Might poked him a smile on his face that was quickly replaced by a serious expression. That's what I want to talk to you about, kid. Looking around before nodding his head slightly. And when I'm like this, call me Toshinori Yagi. The next day found the slime and hero duo at the trash-filled Takoba Municipal Beach Park, the slime eating up smaller bits of trash. So, you want me to clean the beach to prepare myself for your quirk? Izuku asked, swallowing a microwave as Yagi watched in morbid fascination before shaking his head to clear it. Yes, with as strong as it has become being passed down 8 times, I worry that someone not prepared for it could explode. He explained, crushing a rusted fire hydrant into a coal before tossing it at the slime, who caught it with a tendril, absorbing it after a few seconds. Not to complain, but how will eating beach trash prepare my body? When I punched that villain the other day, I noticed that you were quite durable. He said, this time crushing a kitchen sink into a cube and tossing it at the slime. I also noticed that the explosions the other day didn't faze you in the slightest. I've gotten used to his explosions. Izuku absorbed the metal cube. And yeah, my body is pretty durable. I mean, I can get hurt, but I can easily fix it. The slime said, getting a raised brow from the hero. How so? All Might asked. Izuku's body jiggled as a tendril grabbed a rusted knife from the trash around them before moving with ease, severing part of the tendril which fell to the ground, no longer holding its form. The hero took a step back in shock, watching as the tendril seemed to regrow. When I absorb something I can either break it down in its base components. He moved the tendril back and forth. Or digest it and use it to create more of the stuff that makes up my body. So you can heal yourself so long as you have something to absorb. Yeah, or just make extra that I keep in my stomach. He said, getting a nod from All Might that quickly became a confused look. Stomach. Yeah, it's kinda like a subspace pocket. I can store my personal items as well as material I want to break down if needed. And I can break things down and copy them. How so? All Might asked. Well. Izuku started to say before his form started to sparkle, the light seeming to come from inside him. One time Kachin used his quirk and I absorbed some of his sweat. It took a couple of months but I was able to kind of copy it. How? Asked the number one hero, his curiosity was obvious. Well, I was able to break down the components that his sweat was composed of and use the materials in my stomach to copy it. Though I lack a body to use it as he does. So instead I sparkle. He said with poorly disguised embarrassment. After a couple of moments of silence, All Might regained his senses and gave him a nod. How much can your stomach hold? I don't know. Izuku said. Also I don't usually eat. I mean my mom makes me food and I eat it, but it's more of a habit. Give me a little sunlight and with some photosynthesis, I don't have to eat for months. Then let's test the limits of your quirk. All Might said with a smirk. We have 10 months to push the mastery of your quirk to its limits and prepare. Are you ready to start, young Midoriya? All Might asked, getting an excited nod from the slime. Then let's begin. 10 months of training later. Well done, young Midoriya. The skeleton form of the number one hero shouted, eyes moving up and down the now lean beach before resting on the small slime, who just finished eating a small van someone had abandoned on the beach. Thanks, All Might. The slime said, bobbing slightly as the number one hero reached up and plucked a hair from his head. Remember, it was through your hard work over the last 10 months, young Midoriya, that you have proved that you are worthy of this power. All Might smiled, holding out the hair to the slime. Now eat this. What? Izuku asked in clear disbelief, getting a chuckle out of the number one hero that quickly turned into a laugh. Sorry, I could not resist, young Midoriya. He said, coughing up a little blood that he quickly wiped away. However, for my quirk to pass on you have to ingest some of my DNA. He said, holding his hand out further. Hesitantly, Izuku reached out a tendril, the hair in All Might's hand sinking into it slowly as it dissolved in his body, the process visible green tinted through the slime that his body was made of. So Izuku started to speak only for his body to start to fluctuate wildly, more tendrils forming and swinging at the air, as All Might took a step back, eyes wide as his successor's slime body contorted before it stilled completely. The number one hero's eyes filled with worry and horror, as his student's body remained perfectly still. The green color darkened a bit. Young Midoriya. The hero said, shifting into his buff form up as he walked toward the unmoving slime before there was a bright flash that blinded the hero and made him shrink back into his normal form as he shielded his eyes. Black spot danced in his eyes as the light died down. All Might. A young voice asked, a worried and confused voice sounding very much like Izuku, though different than the voice usually used by the slime. The number one hero lowered his arm as the black spots in his vision cleared. Are you okay? All Might started to ask if his successor was okay, only to fall silent, mouth hanging open as he found himself looking at the familiar face of his mentor, younger than he'd ever remembered her being. Nana? The pro hero asked, voice a whisper, his mind grinding to a halt. Nana? Nana asked, head tilting to the side, green eyes wide and green hair waving at the motion, pulling All Might from his disbelief as he realized that while it looked like a younger version of Nana Shimura, her eye and hair color were the very same as the slime hero in training. He stared at them in sheer befuddlement as the young girl moved their hands around, eyes trailing them as their head moved back and forth, a look of unfiltered wonder on their face, before moving their hands to their face, touching with a look of surprise, hands moving up their face then to their hair, which made them jerk their hand back before touching it again. Young Midoriya? The pro asked. The Nana lookalike turned towards him, eyes still shining with an innocent wonder that he'd never seen in his master's eyes. Yes. Izuku asked, with a smile on his face that brought back some old memories, making All Might shake his head to clear them away. Opening his mouth to ask his student what the hell was going on, he found himself rendered silent as he realized that his now non-slime successor, that looked almost like an identical copy of his master, was in a state of undress that made the hero shield his eyes and curl into a ball on instinct, ingrained by an enraged Nana when he'd accidentally walked in on her and her husband. During his early years training with Nana. All Might. Izuku asked, looking at the number 1 hero curled into a ball on the ground, muttering something fierce. A look of worry on his new face. Midoriya hummed to herself as she let herself into her apartment, a single grocery bag in her free hand and keys in the other, moving to set them down on the table near the entrance of the apartment, only to pause at the sight that greeted her. A skeletal-looking man sat on her couch, his face buried in his hands as a young girl wearing a coat, and only that rubbed her face against the interlining of it, something that made her slowly move to set down the grocery bag and reach for her phone that was currently in her purse as she moved her keys around in her hand, reaching for the pepper spray attached to them by a keychain. The gag gift given to her by Mitsuki after the blonde had told her about how she'd met her husband by pepper spraying him in the face by accident, the blonde joking that maybe she'd be able to meet a nice guy after Inko's husband had left the young woman just before Izuku had been born. The green-haired woman winced as the sound of keys caught the attention of the girl who stopped rubbing her face against the jacket's interior to look at her with a wide smile and eyes a very familiar shade of green. "Mom?" The girl asked, making Inko pause at the hint of worry he could hear from their voice and see in their eyes. "So let me see if I got this right," Inko asked 30 minutes later, sitting on her couch with a cup of warm tea in her hands, looking down at the now kneeling and very buff number 1 hero, with Izuku dressed in one of his mother's shirts and pair of her sweats, under the very large coat he was still wearing. Gin buried in the fluff that made up the inside of the coat, while he took a sip from a cup of tea in his hands with wide eyes, a wider smile than before. "Izuku ran into you after getting attacked by another person with a slime-like quirk, then he attached himself to you, and then followed you into a villain attack after the man who attacked him had escaped." She took a sip from her tea, sparing a glance at her very human son, who was enjoying his tea with a relish that made her equally happy and slightly worried that he seemed lost in his own little world. Then after that, you not only encouraged by saying it was the right thing to do, but offered your quirk to him and spent the last 10 months training him his secret before giving it to him. Her glare and tone made the All Might push his head closer to the floor and start to shake. "Without any medical personally and with no idea on how it would affect him or his quirk or even informing me, his mother, of what you were going to do. Is that right, All Might?" she asked, voice filled with fury at the end. All Might's head by the end was buried into the floor of the apartment hard enough to crack the tile, something that made him shake even more. "Well, Mrs." he started to say, raising his head, only to slam it into the floor again and shrink back into his skeleton form, sweat trailing down his no-bruised forehead. "I'd say to call me Ms. Midoriya, All Might. But then I think that would be a bit pointless now that you have made Izuku your successor." She said the word with a feral smile. "Something from what you said would make you a part of Izuku's life and by extension mine. So please, call me Inko." All Might swallowed, looking up again with a fake smile and bravado that quickly crumbled at the look on Inko's face, which was overlaid with a memory of his master with a very similar look before she'd thrown him off a moving train to teach him a landing strategy, though he held firm that it was because he'd walked in on her in the shower after some brutal training from Gran Torino. To this day he stayed as far away from trains as humanly possible, in fear of freezing up when hearing the sound of a train's horn. "Inko?" he managed to say, keeping his eyes trained on hers with as much effort as it had taken to force himself into his hero form during the slime villain incident. "I understand that I make..." He choked as the woman's eyes narrowed. "I know that I overstepped," he said, shouting near the end in worry, letting out a small sighing as her eyes widened from the narrow look that had been fixed on him. "And I apologize, boo." He swallowed again as her eyes narrowed again, stealing his resolve and forced the words from his lips. "But I do not regret giving my quirk to young Izuku. I know he will be an amazing hero, and after these last few months getting to know the young sly man, I have complete faith in him," he finished, body tense and eyes filled with fear. Inko stared at the number 1 hero, looking into his blue eyes for any kind of deception or ulterior motive, but found none, making the woman let out a sigh and sit her tea down on the table next to the couch, looking at her newly human son who had sat his empty cup down and was now back to rubbing his face into the fluff of the coat with a carefree look that made her heart soar. "What is your name?" she asked, her tone no longer holding the barely controlled rage and venom from before, getting a wide-eyed look of confusion and disbelief from All Might, making her sigh again and hold back a chuckle as he blinked before reiterating. "If you're going to be a constant presence in my son's life. Though to be honest, with all his posters and merchandise you've been for years already, and if we're going to talk, and trust me, we will be talking about what one for Alan being your successor means exactly, then I want to know your name, because I'm not going to just keep calling you All Might," she said, arms crossed. "I mean, what do you have Izuku call you when you're like this?" she asked, gesturing to his skeletal form. All Might," he answered weakly, wilting under the unimpressed look from Inko, before quickly speaking again. "Toshinori Yagi, my real name is Toshinori Yagi," he said. "Okay, Toshinori," she said, making sure she had his name right before gesturing to Izuku. Now well I would love to chat and consult a doctor about why his new quirk has made him human. Izuku has 2 hours before the entrance exams and I'd rather he'd have something that fits to do the physical portion of it in. And things to wear as he hasn't needed clothes since he was in preschool and we don't have the time to walk to the store and back in those 2 hours. She said, before poking Izuku, pulling from his enjoyment of the fuzzy part of the jacket and getting his attention before looking at All Might again. So tell me, do you have a car? I thought this would be harder. Izuku muttered. His mother and All Might watched as the young former slime dressed in a new outfit with All Might's coat still on, the bottom hem making it more of a trench coat than an overly long dress, as he walked around All Might's car Hercules, outside one of the nicer stores near UA. The hour of walking a shopping having gotten the slime somewhat used to his new appendages, though every time he tried to run, he managed to faceplant. I never imagined I would go clothes shopping for Izuku. Inko said, a small smile on her face, eyes moving to Izuku's hair which was done up like hers, something she had done subconsciously while helping Izuku with his clothes. Are you sure the dresses were necessary? All Might asked, watching the young slime that now resembled his master to a scary degree try and run only to fall again. I mean I'm not judging but, why? He asked. Well Izuku doesn't seem to mind and it gives me an excuse to dress him up. She said with a chuckle at the look given to her by the number 1 hero. I'm not going to force him, but you said he looks like your mentor right? She asked, noticing the pained look that crossed All Might's face for a second. Scarcely so. Especially with how you've done with his hair. He said, with a small smile of fondness. It's almost like seeing her again. Though I don't think I ever saw her so attached to a jacket because of some fluff, he said with a chuckle that made Inko laugh, the 2 adults getting a look of confusion from Izuku before he went back to practicing walking faster. To be honest I can't imagine what it must be like for him. She said with pride and love. I mean to go from his slime form to suddenly human with all 5 senses and still going to the entrance exams like it's a normal day. She laughed a little. To be honest his tenacity scares me sometimes. But that's what makes him Izuku. And I wouldn't want my son to be anything other than himself. She said, getting a nod from All Might. To be honest, I truly believe he will be a hero that will surpass me. He said with sincerity. He has the will and the brains to outshine me on my best days. He said with an over-enthusiastic flourish of his arms that got another laugh from Inko that made him smile a bit, which turned into a sad one as he looked at Inko with apologetic eyes. You're right though. I should have informed you of what it entails to be my successor and what that means for your son. I am truly sorry. He said with a small bow of his head. Inko patted the hero's arm with a nod as they saw Izuku take another nosedive after trying to run again, both watching for a second before nodding. We'll talk about it while he takes the exam. She said, getting a nod in return. I recommend my place, no neighbors to be bothered by shouting. All Might suggested, getting a raised eyebrow from Inko before his mind caught up to what he said, and he took a panicked step back waving his arms wildly. I mean not like that. I would nev. I mean I would like to. I mean. He fell silent as Inko let out a laugh, rolling her eyes at the number 1 hero as she patted his arm. Just stop. She said, laughter still pouring from her lips at the tongue-tied hero. And sounds like a good idea, besides I might be tempted to throw stuff at you, and I like my apartment the way it is. She with a look that promised pain and scared the hero even more. Now come on 15 minutes till the exam, and the drive should take 5. She said the hero moving the driver's side silently, scared as to what Izuku's mother would do to him. Izuku couldn't help but look around with wonder at the other test takers after moving into a huge room after the written test, riding being something that had been easier to learn than running, and the surreal feeling of being taller in his new form, sitting in a chair next to Bakugo who he was pretty sure didn't recognize him by his mutters of stupid slime under his breath. Something that would have been louder and filled with more threats of bodily harm. The hell you want green hair? He yelled at an unfazed Izuku who had long since gotten used to Bakugo's yelling. A seat far away from an angry blonde Pomeranian. He replied instantly without thought, smirking as Bakugo paused at the reply, not expecting the deadpan delivery from the former slime. Before Bakugo could say anything Present Mick walked in, and the room fell silent as he gave instructions on what would be in the physical portion of the exam, having to fight 3 types of robots with 3 different numerical values in a set time, with a 4th being more of a distraction which was worth no points, something that made Bakugo mutter something about scrap or crap. Izuku was more distracted by the student in front of him, a girl who was looking up in worry at a floating eraser as it made its way lazily to the ceiling. Izuku was pulled from his pastime as Present Mick let out a shout of plus ultra before telling them to head to the changing rooms before moving to the buses parked and waiting to take them to their testing sites. After a quick step into the female changing room, something he did without thought after always accompanying his mother into the female changing room for the hot springs, after all, there wasn't the need for a slime one, he swallowed his outfit and already had the track outfit bought for him on in a second, All Might's former coat still on top of it. Getting some weird looks as he made his way to the bus and then to the testing site, humming to himself as he noticed that Bakugo was not as his group, something that brought a small smile to his face as he continued to hum, ignoring a pointed glare from a blue-haired young man with glasses on the way to the testing site, walking out of the bus with an accidental flourish as he also tripped. Having not mastered the challenge that is the step. Still humming, Izuku noticed a worried-looking brown-haired girl, nervously moving her hands. Making his way over to her, he found his path blocked by the blue-haired young man he recognized had been the one asking about the 0-pointers. "Excuse me, but if you're not going to take this test seriously and try and sabotage another applicant's attempt, then I ask you to rethink what it may." He started to lecture Izuku only to be stopped by an arm wrapped around his shoulders by another applicant, a white-haired girl with red eyes and rabbit ears and a carefree smile on her face. "Calm down, Four Eyes," she said, making the glasses-wearing teen fall silent with an indignant look on his face. "If you're going to blast a girl, at least be a gentleman and buy her dinner first," she said, with a wink at Izuku and a gasp from the bluehead. I would never," he shouted before his eyes widened. "I mean, it's not the time. I mean." The blue-haired guy tried to dig himself out of the grave dug by the rabbit girl, only to be stuck opening and closing his mouth silently as the girl slid away from him with a chuckle. Grabbing Izuku's arm and pulling him along as some of the other examinees just looked at the glasses-wearing teen with pity. "Sorry, but you look like you could use a little help," the white-haired girl said, pulling Izuku to the front of the group of waiting students. "I'm Rumi, by the way," she said, looking at Izuku with barely hid amusement as the young man stared at his feet, trying to make sure not to trip and pull the rabbit-eared girl down. Taking Izuku staring at his feet to mean something else, she let out another chuckle as they stopped in front of the group, others taking a step back from Rumi after seeing what she did to the blue-haired young man. "Or maybe I should take you out to dinner instead," she said, making Izuku look up with wide eyes as the girl moved her lips to his ear. "Gotcha," she said with a wink and a smile as Present Mick shouted. "Go." Rumi gave him a wave as she took off with a run and a hop into the faux city serving as a testing site. The other examinees looked at Present Mick, who gave them a deadpan look. "There are no countdowns in real life," he shouted. The other examinees seemed to pause as one before sprinting and running into the test site, leaving Izuku staring at the gate before letting out a sigh before taking a running position, getting a chuckle from Present Mick that he ignored. "I think I've got this," Izuku muttered, closing his eyes and focusing on the feeling of his legs ready to spring, taking a step forward only for his eyes to widen as he suddenly felt something different in his legs, the ground caving in with the first step and arms flinging up as he was flung forward like a ragdoll, only having a second to think before he went flying into the testing site. Leaving a wide-eyed Present Mick to look at the trench dug into the cement, starting with a face print by the test taker. "I hope he meant to do that," Present Mick said before he heard a loud bang followed by screaming in French, followed by more screaming and bangs. "Shota will eat that kid alive if he passes." Izuku groaned in annoyance rather than pain as he pulled himself from the remains of a three-pointer as a blonde boy yelled at him in French. "Sorry," he shouted before taking off, only to scream as he was once again sent flying by his now crazy strong legs, something that would have made him curious if he didn't find himself going through walls, cars, light posts, robots, and a human grave. In his struggle to get control of his body of only 5 hours. After 5 minutes of nothing but slamming in and through things, Izuku let out another groan as he laid on the ground, his annoyance now outweighing his happiness of having an actual body. He was drawn from his thoughts by the sudden shape shading him from the sun. Looking up, Izuku found himself looking into a pair of red eyes. "I'd say I'm impressed at the damage you can do with those legs, but all the screaming and flailing kind of ruins the moment, you know," she said with a smirk, kicking a soccer ball-sized piece of debris through a three-pointer and into a one-pointer. "Bite me," Izuku said, pulling himself into a sitting position. "Before the first date. What kind of girl do you take me for?" Rumi said without hesitation, making Izuku groan as she offered him a hand up. "Not used to having legs," he said, pulling himself up as Rumi looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "Long story. Shouldn't you be destroying robots and flirting with strangers?" "Hey, I only flirt with the cute one," she said with fake indignity, giving an approaching two-pointer roundhouse kick. "Been called cute before, gets kind of old," Izuku said, remembering how his former classmates would call slime him cute, ducking under one-pointer and slamming his arm through it with surprising ease. "How about your name?" Rumi asked. Izuku watched as she crouched before taking off with a leap, bouncing from surface to surface with ease as she made her way through a group of robots. maybe next time. She yelled as she kicked her way through more robots with a whoop and laughter. Izuku let out a sigh of frustration, glaring at his legs before letting out another sigh, pausing as he did so. Why am I sighing? I don't breathe. Do I? He asked, putting a hand on his chest before dropping it and shaking his head. Thoughts for later, legs right now. Sitting back down, Izuku closed his eyes, and after a couple of seconds of focusing he was a slime again under the bundle of his clothes. Okay, now can I? He muttered before he popped back into his human form sitting on the ground. Like riding a bike. I wonder if mom will teach me how. He muttered before shaking his head. Thoughts for later. He poked his crossed legs with one finger while picking up a rock with his free hand and threw it through one pointer with ease. He paused looking at his arm, head tilted to the side. Am I thinking too much? Picking up another rock he frowned as it was crushed in his grasp before his eyes widened and he smirked as with the other he picked a rock up and chucked it at a three-pointer about to squish a grape. Maybe. Izuku closed his eyes again, reverting into a slime. Now something different. He muttered, knowing that while he wasn't used to his human form, he was more than familiar with himself as a slime, trying to find anything that felt different. The slime vibrated in happiness as he found it. The closest thing he could compare it to was a star, as he mentally reached out for it as if he was reaching for something in his stomach, grasping it he couldn't help but gasp as suddenly his sense were increased to the point of pain, pulling back as if burned. Not noticing that on his slime body that when he touched what he could only be one for all, it sparked with green lighting, a memory coming to the forefront of his mind. Few months ago. You said one for all passes down power, right? But how does it affect quirks? Slime, Izuku asked, his slime form the size of a couch as he was eating a rusted tractor, with All Might watching with disbelief as he could see the tractor break apart inside Izuku. Well, from what I understand, young Midoriya, it powers them up quite a bit, he said, leaning against a fridge. Though the details are a bit fuzzy, after all, I never had a quirk to power up and I can't attest to what my mentor's quirk was like before she got one for all. You were quirkless? Izuku asked, surprised at the fact, making All Might chuckle. Why, yes, though back then it was more common. All Might said with a small smile. To be honest though, I can't remember what it's like to not have a quirk, he said, trailing off a bit. If you don't want to, guy. Izuku started to say, only for All Might to laugh. Like I've told you, young Midoriya, one way or another I will lose my quirk. His hand clasped the side of his chest that had been injured all those years ago. I will miss it, but trust me when I say I want no one other than you to receive it. All Might smiled. What's it feel like? Izuku asked, getting a curious look from All Might. He elaborated. Well, when I tried to use Bakugo's explosions. It tingled. It felt weird like the other thing, he said. Other thing? All Might asked, the slime shrinking back down to his regular size as he absorbed the abscess slime he'd had stored in his stomach to heal himself or make himself bigger, something All Might had thought was possible when he saw Izuku cover a fridge completely and absorb it in seconds. We'll promise not to laugh, he said, as his form seemed to shiver for a bit before what looked like a nose grew from the slime's front, though looking closer All Might realized it wasn't a nose but a beak. He could only stare dumbly at the beak's slime. What? The number one hero could only say in sheer disbelief. Well, you know, I said my mom sometimes makes me lunches, he said, getting a nod. Well, you know, I got curious and decided to try and break it down and analyze the chicken, you know. Because I was bored and curious, and well, after a couple of weeks, I can do this. You can grow a beak, All Might said in a voice of pure disbelief. Yes, the slime said. And it feels weird when you do it, he asked, sounding as if he was done with the craziness that was his life. Well, when I put something in my stomach I can do it from any point of my body. It's second nature, and Bakugo's explosions are like my stomach growling. But this is like an itch at a specific place. I don't know what itchiness feels like, but maybe that's a close estimation. All Might said before buffing out. Before my injury, I think I would be unable to tell you how it feels to use my quirk. After all, it was second nature by the time I was in my late 20s, but if you want to know what it feels like, it's like filling a balloon, the hero said, reverting to his skeleton form. Letting one for all fill everything, muscles, bone, organs, brain. Before, it was like letting water flow through a pipe easily and something I took for granted. He looked down at his skinny arms with a look of sadness. Now it's like those Play-Doh shaping toys, pushing it to fit correctly, but in the end, I won't hold that shape forever. All Might, Izuku muttered, making the hero look up with a sad smile. It's like electricity running from your head to your toes, but more. It's like when you feel the sun hits. It has a warmth like that. Sorry, young Midoriya. He gave a wry grin. I don't know how to explain it really. But trust me, when you have it you will know what I mean. If I could give you any advice, let go, Izuku. All Might looked towards the ocean with a smile. don't try and force it. That can hurt. His grip tightened on his chest injury, making him wince. One for all. Let it guide you. He smiled softly as he looked at the slime. So let it go. Izuku muttered, not reaching out to take it, but instead reaching out to it, letting a gasp as it reached back, his form shifting back into his human form, a smile on his face as he felt it spread throughout his body, his eyes widening as he noticed the green lighting that started to race across his skin as more and more of One for All filled him. All Might's jacket on him fluttering as he went further and further, wincing as he felt his body strain for a second before it was gone, reappearing as he pushes his limits further, his senses increasing as he realized what was happening. One for All was pushing his body and quirk to their limits, pushing his body to the breaking point, but instead of breaking down, One for All was also empowering his original quirk, increasing the speed of his normal regenerative abilities past what he could do before. The weak cells that broke down were analyzed subconsciously for what was wrong with them and replaced with stronger cells, the world slowing down as the output of One for All increased. Okay. Izuku said, opening his eyes and looking at three-pointer with its guns pointed at him, eyes sparking with green electricity as his body flexing his arms and legs, feeling the sleeves of the tracksuit underneath All Might's coat being shredded and his shoes and lower pants legs disintegrating as his mind worked faster than before. His thought processes increased as new stronger cells were created, as each cell in his body worked as a muscle, nerve ending, and brain cell push him to the absolute, a smile forming on his face as he realized he was moving smoother, the three-pointer moving at a snail's pace as he jumped, copying how he'd seen RUMI doing it, his leg going through it with ease. He skidded across the ground, feet digging into the asphalt as he brought himself to a stop, not falling onto his face. Izuku found himself unable to describe what he was feeling, every cell in his body vibrating with unspent energy, as One for All coursed through him, a wide smile spreading across his face as a group of bot approached him. One for All. He thought. Full cowl. He finished out loud before ripping his way through the bots with ease, each movement improving as he went, till his body was moving with practiced ease as he made his way through the testing site, helping those in need till the 1-minute warning was announced. The ground shook, bringing him to a stop as he saw a massive robot rise from the ground, ripping through buildings and the street as it made its entrance. Izuku bounced across rooftops, making his way higher and higher till he was on the tallest building on the site, able to see the destruction being caused by the zero-pointer. You've got to wonder how they pay for these things. RUMI said from behind him, pulling Izuku from watching the carnage. He turned to face her only for her to make her way past him and take a seat on the edge of the building, reaching into her pocket and pulling out an apple, giving Izuku a look as he looked at her in disbelief. What? Thought I'd be eating a carrot, she said before sticking her tongue out at him with a smirk before taking a bite, turning to look at the destruction as she ate. You know we could be helping them? Izuku asked, moving to take a seat next to her. I mean, we are heroes in training, he said, making RUMI scoff. Do you think they would let people get hurt? She asked, gesturing at the zero-pointer, besides no one's dumb enough to get in it. Help. Izuku and RUMI turned in the direction of the shout, eyes scanning the road. Izuku saw the brown-haired nervous girl from before. He pushed his sight to its limits, seeing that she was trapped under some rubble at the other examinees ran away, leaving her. She's trapped, Izuku said, hands bracing the edge of the roof at RUMI turned to him with a look of surprise as he moved to stand, taking a few steps back from the edge. How th? RUMI didn't get to ask her question about how he'd been able to see her from where they were as Izuku was once again in full cowl, her eyes widening at his new look as he took a running leap off the roof without hesitation, forcing RUMI to drop her apple as she saw his impact with the ground just as the zero-pointer's arm punched forwards. Are you okay? Izuku asked the shocked-looking girl trapped under rubble he stood in front of, one arm holding back the massive robot's arm, his feet digging into the ground as it tried to push its arm forward. The girl said, just staring in disbelief as Izuku gave her one glance before pushing his arm forward, though instead of moving the massive robot, it dug his feet deeper into the street, making him sigh. Well, might as well see if this works, he muttered, full cowl sparking as he tried one of the first things he'd ever done with his quirk, now that One for All was running through him. Devour, he said, the lighting from his full cowl stretching from the hand holding back the machine's arm to encase the entire thing before in an instant it was gone, consumed and analyzed in an instant by his empowered quirk. The loss of the counterweight and the speed of his devour surprised Izuku enough that he fell onto the ground, managing to land on his hands and knees instead of his face, making the brown-haired girl let out a laugh at the absurd situation as President Mick announced the exam was over. Izuku let out a sigh and picked himself up, making his way to help the girl out of the rubble. You hole, said a panting RUMI as she arrived. Izuku devoured the rubble on the brown-haired girl, freeing her and letting her use his shoulder as RUMI smirked. Already picking up other girls. Greenie, she said, getting her breathing under control as she moved to help Izuku with the girl who became a blushing mess at the insinuation. Having better luck than you are, he said before pausing. Also, Izuku. Huh? Rumi asked as they moved the still blushing girl to recovery girl who was taking care of the injured test takers, Izuku getting a glare from the French blonde he'd accidentally stolen some bots from during his impression as a ragdoll. That's my name, Rumi, he said, with a smirk and a wink, letting her take the injured girl as he made his way out of the testing site with his new ability to run, managing to take the first bus back to the entrance of the school, knowing that he'd be seeing the rabbit-eared girl again. Day after entrance exam. Izuku let out a yawn as he scratched the back of his head, momentarily distracted by the softness of his hair, before pushing down the urge to keep touching it, instead looking across the table at a deflated All Might awkwardly eating breakfast across from him while doing some paperwork while Inko moved around the kitchen, humming a song and getting a flinch from All Might whenever she neared a skillet. Do you want to eat, Izuku? His mom asked. He went to say no, but he paused as he remembered the taste of the tea the day before, eyes widening as he realized that while distracted by the feeling of fluffiness, he had ignored the return of the sense of taste. Yes please, he said, enthusiastically nodding, his hair bobbing as he did. It was down, the longest parts reaching his shoulder blades, though it was stopped by the hood of the All Might Odyssey he had worn to bed the night before, having put it on after getting rid of the destroyed tracksuit and hanging up his new jacket. During the night he'd gotten the attention of both his mom and All Might after they'd returned from their discussion when he'd fallen off his bed, both adults checking to see if he was okay, only to find him moving around like a cat on the ground. The softness of the Odyssey distracting him from the disbelieving look of All Might and of his mom snapping picture after picture before both had closed the door, leaving Izuku to enjoy his new sense of touch with a smile on his face. So? Izuku said, watching as his mom moved around the kitchen. Why is All Might here? He asked, pausing for a second. Not that I mind, but. He looked at the number one hero, noticing for the first time his black eye. Did you punch All Might? He asked in disbelief, making Inko giggle and All Might wince. No. But he did tell me something that made me rip off the front door of his house. He pushed me out of the way and it kind of hit him on the head, she said, ignoring the wide-eyed look from Izuku and the pained look from All Might. I felt bad for it that I offered him the guest room till they repair his door. She smirked a bit as she sat a plate down in front of Izuku. What did he tell you? Izuku asked, noticing All Might freeze, and Inko's smile became icy as Izuku grabbed a fork, fiddling with it for a bit before finding a good way to hold it. Something about the man who injured him, she said, with a hint of disgust. Don't worry, if you need to know we'll both tell you, honey, no need to make you worry needlessly, though you should know that he'll be teaching at UA. She said, changing the subject while ignoring the wary look from All Might as Izuku took a bite of the food, eyes widening before he started to eat faster, leaving to both adult to watch as Izuku demolished his plate of food, letting out a sigh as he finished, leaning back in his chair with a smile on his face, before his brain caught up with what his mom had said. Sitting up straight with wide eyes. You're teaching at UA? He asked, completely forgetting about the previous subject as All Might let out a sigh, giving Izuku a nod. It's supposed to be a surprise for this year of students, but telling you early wouldn't hurt young Midoriya, he said, taking a nibble off a piece of toast as Inko sat down at the table, giving him a look. Wait. Tell me early, does that mean I passed? Izuku asked, making the number one hero jump in his seat as Inko let out a laugh. Well. All Might muttered as he tried to think of something to say before letting out another sigh. Yes, young Midoriya, you did pass, he said, nodding to Inko. I was supposed to watch the entrance exams, however, my discussion with your mother took longer than I expected, so Principal Nezu has been kind enough to provide the recording of the practical portions of the exam, so I plan to watch that today, while I finish the forms needed to become a teacher at UA. He let out a small laugh with a sad smile. Mirai used to take care of this kind of stuff. I mean, starting an agency takes less paperwork than what UA gave Nezumi to fill out. The number one side. Not to mention the acceptance videos I have to take part in. Izuku tilted his head at the mention of Sir Night Eye's real name, having never heard his meteor mention his former sidekick, before his mind focused on the fact that All Might and most likely his mother would be watching the footage of his attempts at running. Quickly moving to stand. Well, I think I'm gonna go out, he said, wincing at the narrowing of his mother's eyes. Dressed in pajamas? She asked, with a raised eyebrow, making Izuku look at her puzzled. Is that weird? Izuku asked, raising a hand and rubbing his face against the sleeve of the Odyssey. I mean, it's so soft, he said, giving his mother a pleading look. No, Izuku, you are not wearing a Odyssey when you go out, she said before pausing, a small smile forming on her face as an idea came to mind. How about this, you can wear that jacket you love so much if you let me choose your outfit for today. she said, watching as Izuku pondered the offer before giving his mom a small nod of agreement after Izuku realized that while he had seen people in clothes, he knew nothing about what to wear with what, deciding to rely on his mom's judgment till he got the concept of style down. And if it's not too much, could you help with costume ideas for Izuku? With Izuku's input, of course. All Might asked, getting the son and mother's attention. Since you already know I'm going to be a teacher and that you've passed, I could have Nezu give me your acceptance letter and the forms needed when I go do the acceptance videos. All Might said, getting a nod from Izuku and Inko, before he turned his attention back to the paperwork and trying to eat the meal Inko had given him, scared to think about what she would do if he did not eat it all. Thanks All Might. Izuku said, thanking the hero as he and his mother made their way to his room, his mother's look of satisfaction going unnoticed by the slime. Izuku's head moved to the sound of music coming through the headphones he'd borrowed from his mother as he walked down the street, his phone in the pocket of what had been All Might's jacket, as the shirt and skirt combo his mother had put him in lacked pockets. He had had some reservations about wearing it, but the look of excitement on his mother's face and the fact she'd picked it out for him led him to accept it and most likely whatever other outfit she and Mitsuki would choose for him, considering the pictures that his mother had taken and said she was sending to the blonde. Though he did find how the skirt fluttered interesting and decided that as long as it made his mother happy he'd wear whatever. Plus the resigned look on All Might's face had made the slime laugh, which had the effect of the number one hero curing into another bowl on the floor, muttering something about not the wrench again, as Inko hugged Izuku and told him to be safe. Izuku smiled wilder as he enjoyed the fact he could walk around town, no longer having to hop or roll or being foot level, and able to look into windows of the shops he passed, a bounce in his step, not noticing the looks he received from some guys and girls as he started to hum along with the song as he enjoyed his new height. Lost in the euphoria of his new body, Izuku didn't notice that he'd managed to talk into an alleyway, hip swaying to the music he listened to. The slime was pulled from his little world by a small wild-haired missile slamming into his legs, making him wave his arms frantically in his panic to keep his balance as he finally took notice of his surroundings. The white-haired missile turned out to be a small white-haired girl with panic-filled red eyes that brought the rabbit girl from the exam to the front of his mind, only for those thoughts to be pushed to the side as he noticed the ragged dress the girl was wearing and the bandages covering her arms. Help. The girl said, clinging tightly to him, One for All activated subconsciously as his mind made sense of the facts of his situation, the sound of footsteps he could coming from around a corner in the alleyway, the flinch the girl made at it, the lack of any good hiding spots. The world slowed down as he increased his thought processes further before he realized there was only one option. The world speeding back up as he moved back so he could look the girl in the eyes, bringing a hand to rest on her head, noticing her flinch slightly, something that brought a hint of target that he quickly squashed knowing they were low on time. I need you to trust me. Izuku said, looking the child in the eyes, a determined look on his face that would have made All Might start praying, as it was the same look on Nana's when she had a crazy idea. He forced a smile onto his face. I know you scared but I need you to be brave. He could hear the steps getting louder, lowering his voice, but keeping his eyes on hers. Don't worry. He placed his hand on her head, patting it softly, idling noticing the horn on her head. Because I am here. He watched as the girl seemed to study him before she gave him a small determined nod that brought a real smile to his face. Izuku hummed a familiar song as he walked calmly down the alley, headphones once again in his ears, hips and skirt swaying slightly as he did his best to not show the panic he was feeling as he caught sight of the man the little girl had been running from, a brown-haired man with a bird mask on his face. And what appeared to be a fluffy jacket that momentarily distracted him before he got control of his thoughts again. Walking down the alley towards the man, he tried his best to act normal, mentally praying that it wouldn't turn ugly, his mind idly trying to come up with ways to escape if needed. He was pulled from his mild panic and into a full-blown one as the man gestured to his ears as he stepped in front of Izuku, eyes boring into the slimes as he quickly removed the headphones, trying hard not to show his panic. Have you seen a small white-haired child? The man asked, eyes scanning the alleyway as his hand clenched and unclenched. It seems my daughter has decided to run off on her own, and I'm quite worried, he said as his gaze focused on Izuku, making the slime want to swallow nervously. Pushing his emotions down and trying to act casual, Izuku shook his head, sliding his headphones into the pocket of his jacket, pulling out his phone casually to turn off the music and sliding it back into his pocket, hoping the man wouldn't notice him dialing the 3-digit emergency line while acting like he was resting his hand in his pocket. Sorry, Izuku said, looking around the alley. If you want I could help look for her, he said, trying his best to emulate the rabbit girl as he put a flirty smile on his face while copying the tones of the girls who used to call his slime form cute. We could look together, he said, emphasizing the word together while taking a step closer to the man, going against every instinct in him telling him to run. The bird-masked man gave him a look that seemed to go right through him before his gaze moved past Izuku back to scanning the alley. "No thanks," the man said, pushing past Izuku. "I'm sure she'll turn up," the man said, not sparing another glance at Izuku as he made his way down the way Izuku came and out of sight. Izuku made a show of huffing in fake disappointment as he turned and put his headphones back into his eyes, hands shaking as he kept his phone in his hand, speed walking as he exited the alley and made his way to a bus stop, riding the bus in complete silence. But moving his head as if still listening to music and making sure to act normal as his hands kept shaking in his pockets till he exited the bus and found an empty lot, raising a hand. "Please be okay," Izuku muttered, as the electricity of One for All spread out from his hand before in the empty lot stood the wide-eyed young girl, who looked around with confusion. "Thank God," Izuku said, falling to his knees with a sigh of relief. "I'm so glad that worked." "What?" the small girl said, eyes scanning the empty lot before fixing themselves on the green-haired slime. "Sorry had to eat you," Izuku said, wincing at the phrasing. "I mean I had to store you in my stomach, haven't done that since I was little," he said. Remember a time when he tried to swallow Bakugo back when his explosions had still hurt his slime body, though it had failed spectacularly and had left the slime exhausted. "So mind telling me your name?" he asked with a tired smile, the girl giving him a look before seeming to snap out of it. I'm ERI," the girl said, as Izuku gave her a small nod. "I'm Izuku," he said, moving into a more comfortable position to sit, being forced to shift his legs because of the skirt before finding a comfortable way to sit. "So mind tell me what's going on. I'm guessing tall, dark, and Birdie isn't your dad," Izuku said, the small girl tilting her head at the statement before nodding. "He's not my dad," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't want to hurt anymore," she said, sad eyes looking into Izuku's, making the slime reach a hand out, pausing as the girl flinched. "I promise I'm not going to hurt you," he said, offering ERI his hand, the small girl hesitating before reaching her own out, touching his before pulling back a fearful look on her face that was met with a warm smile from Izuku before she slowly reached out again, taking his softly. "See," Izuku said, ERI's grip tightening a bit as she began to cry, the slime slowly pulling the crying girl into a hug, moving a hand to her hair, running it through it gently, as held the crying girl. "Feeling better?" Izuku asked, sitting with his back against a wall with the now waking up ERI in his lap, the sun lower than when they got into the lot. The girl muttered, burying her face into the fluff of Izuku's jacket, making Izuku chuckle. "I know that fluffiness is great and all, but I need to get home and tell All Might what's happened," Izuku said, wincing as he realized that he'd also have to tell his mother. "Home? All Might?" ERI asked as Izuku picked her up from under her arms, sitting her down on her feet as he moved to stand, stretching with a sigh before answering her. Home is the apartment my mom and I live in," he said, staring at ERI for a second before shaking his head, removing his coat, and gesturing ERI to raise her arms, helping her slide her arms through the jacket sleeves, the jacket looking more like a dress on the shorter child. "And All Might is the #1 hero," he said, a hair tie popping out of his hand, something his mom had bought during their shopping trip, showing Izuku how to do a simple ponytail so his hair wouldn't get in his eyes. He used his quick lessons to put ERI's hair in a rough but serviceable quick ponytail, before also spitting out an All Might themed hat he'd picked up on the trip, putting on ERI after eating a small hole in the bill for her horn, nodding to himself at the outfit. "I have no idea what I'm doing," he said with a laugh, getting a curious look from the girl. "But this should do till we can get to the apartment," he said before nodding to himself, offering the small girl his hand, which she took after a couple of seconds as they made their way to the nearby bus station, Izuku mentally noting it would take around 40 minutes to get to the stop near his apartment. "What's a hero?" ERI asked as they waited, making Izuku pause to think of an answer, moving to sit on the bench at the stop after helping ERI onto it. "A hero is someone who helps people," Izuku said, pausing for a second to reword it. "Someone who helps people because he can and wants to." Izuku paused again. "I mean, I guess being a hero is a job, but more than that. You asking some tough question, ERI," he said, with a smile at the girl who gave him a curious look. "Does that mean you're a hero, Izuku?" she asked, making Izuku smile at the sincerity in her voice at the question. "Well, I want to be one," he said, seeing the bus that they would be taking in the corner of his eye. "But first I have to go to school to learn how to be a good one." "I think you're already a good hero," she said without hesitation and childlike conviction before a look of confusion crossed her face. "What school?" she asked, head tilted to the side. "How does mom do it?" Izuku gasped, sitting on his couch, dressed in his All Might Odyssey, as ERI ate some sliced apples, dressed now in one of his shirts, as she stared in wonder at the TV, then to the apples and back again. Izuku spared a glance at his failures at attempting to cut an apple, eating them and letting them dissolve, and then at the knife buried to the hilt in the kitchen counter after he'd decided to use one for all to speed up the process. After arriving home, Izuku had found both All Might and his mom gone, with neither answering their cell phones when called, leaving Izuku to wait for them to return while answering ERI's questions as best he could, and after using his new sense of smell, realized sitting on the ground in an empty lot made clothing smell, resulting in quick baths for the two. With Izuku searching for clothing for ERI as she took one which left him dressed in an All Might onesie, while ERI wore some of Izuku's old clothes his mom had kept before his quirk activated. After noticing ERI looking at the scars on her arms and trying to hide them, he'd even broken down a similar colored shirt in his stomach to make cloth straps to cover them, leaving ERI matching the slime as he prepared them both a lunch. After the many failed attempts and his final attempt at making rabbit-shaped apple slices that were lopsided but still good, he found himself where he was, mentally exhausted from the rollercoaster that his day had become. Maybe one for all is unlucky. Izuku muttered to himself, noticing how his life had gotten crazier since meeting All Might and receiving it the day before. One for all? ERI asked, the plate of apple slices now empty and her attention on the slime who now had a deer in the headlights look. It's my quirk," Izuku said, noticing a brief look of fear in ERI's eyes that quickly turned into a dull look. Studying the now subdued girl, Izuku tried to think of something to make her happy before a smirk crossed his face. "It's part of my quirk," he said before giving her a soft smile. "Do you trust me?" he asked, watching as the girl paused to think about it before giving him a small nod that made his smile widen before letting himself revert to his slime form, swallowing his clothes as he did it, leaving a wide-eyed girl staring at the slime on the couch next to her. "My quirk is slime," he said, making himself into different shapes. "One for all is a new part of it," he said, watching as the girl watched him try and take the shape of a square before falling flat, the spark he'd seen when giving the girl her apple slices coming back into the girl's eyes. Her hand moved slightly before she pulled it back, making the slime chuckle, offering a tendril to the girl. "I'm still me." Izuku watched as ERI studied the tendril, slowly moving a hand out and giving it a poke, a curious look in her eyes. "Soft," she said, eyes filled with wonder as Izuku let out a chuckle as the pokes led to Izuku resting on ERI's lap as she patted the slime, eyes filled with happiness. "Not to ruin the mood, ERI, but do you not like quirks?" Izuku asked. The girl's patting stopped before she pulled the slime into a hug, holding him close. "I'm cursed," she muttered, face buried into the slime who could feel her shaking. "I make people disappear." She squeezed the slime tighter. "Please don't leave." Izuku could feel her tears as she asked him not to go the slime, just letting her hold him. "Izuku," whispered a confused Inko, getting the attention of Slime who was currently being used as a teddy bear by the sleeping ERI. Using the 360 degrees of sight his body's makeup gave him, Izuku could see the worried look on her face and the confused look on All Might. Shifting his form, he started to move away from ERI only for her to tight grip, the slime pausing for a second before coming up with an idea. He pulled some of his slime he had stored in his stomach, pushing it out as he moved away from ERI, a spark of one for all flowing into it, leaving a fohim behind as he plopped silently on the ground in front of his mom. Before shifting into his human form, once again in his All Might onesie, gesturing the two adults to follow him after making sure the slime double wouldn't be going anywhere and spat out a blankety, gently laying it on the girl before they made their way out of the apartment, shutting the door gently, leaving Izuku facing the two adults. "I can explain," Izuku said before recounting what had happened that day, leaving his mother with a tired look on her face and All Might with his hands on his face, both adults sharing a look of exasperation as he finished explaining. "Izuku, you can't just kidnap a child from what could have been a very dangerous situation," Inko said, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "You should have gone to the police station. Not brought her home." Worry was in her tone. "I mean, what would have done if things had gone violent? Do you have enough control of your new body to have gotten away? And if that man had used his quirk on you? I mean, you said the girl was terrified and that he scared you, a boy who watches heroes fight villains up close without a lick of fear. Do you have any idea what could have happened to you?" she asked, sending a glare at All Might who had opened his mouth to say something. "And I don't want to hear anything from you right now." She turned her attention back to Izuku. "I get that you want to be a hero, but you're not a hero yet, you're a teenager learning to be one," she said, eyes filled with worry, making Izuku wince and look down. She looked like she needed help. Izuku muttered, looking down at his feet. "I couldn't do nothing." "Young Midoriya," All Might said, raising a hand as a peace gesture as he got a glare from Inko. "I understand needing to act when someone's in trouble, but your mother is right on how poorly it could have gone if this bird-masked man had noticed your deception." He winced at the hurt look on Izuku's face, dredging up old memories before pushing down his discomfort. I admire your drive to help others, it will make you an amazing hero, but you should have contacted the police station. He was walking around in public with her in a hospital gown and bandages on her arms. Izuku said, raising his head to look at All Might and his mother. And from what she told me briefly, he's taken her for walks before. He spat out the word walks with a venom that made All Might and Inko widen their eyes. Someone should have noticed unless they had a way for it to go unnoticed. All Might said, a grimace on his face. A bird-masked man and child in a hospital ground wandering the streets would have gotten some calls to local police. Or at least one concerned citizen. All Might paused for a second after processing what Izuku had said. Wait, bird masks? He asked, getting both Midoriya's attention as he lowered his face into his arms, letting out a loud sigh. Only you, young Izuku. He said tiredly. Both looked at the number 1 hero as he pulled his phone out of his pocket, typing a quick text before looking at Izuku and Inko. When I informed a friend I have in the police force that I'd be in the area working at UA, he informed me of a gang that the police had their eyes on. A Yakuza group with bird masks, and that unless someone was in danger of losing their lives, to let them continue to operate so they could gather information on them. He looked at his phone, wincing at the message before looking at Izuku. You said he had brown hair. Wearing a dark green jacket with a purple fur collar? He asked, getting a nod. Toshinori. Inko said, muttered voice low and filled with disbelief. Please don't tell me Izuku within 48 hours of receiving your quirk and gaining a body, something that I'm still trying to process, that he managed to not only run into a Yakuza member, but take the young girl who is currently sleeping on the couch, who I'm guessing he has to do with the scars on her arm. She asked, the hero nodding and checking his phone for a reply as she rubbed the bridge of her nose. Well. All Might said, eyes on his screen. Naomasa, said the girl matches the description some of the undercover officers gave about a young child, seen in the company of the Yakuza group they're following. He said, turning the screen towards Izuku, a picture of the young man from earlier on it. This is the man you saw, right? He asked, getting a nod. What do we do? Inko asked, looking around worriedly. Well, Naomasa is on his way, he's informed his boss, and they have some questions for young Midoriya and ERI if she's up for it. He said, the last bit turning into a question, eyes fixed on Izuku who thought about it before nodding. I think she'd be willing to answer some. He paused. But, only one other person. He looked from his mom to All Might. I don't want to overwhelm her after the day she's had. He said, getting a smile from his mom and a nod from All Might who tapped at his phone to inform Naomasa. While we wait, why don't you introduce me to ERI? Inko asked. It would probably be better to do it before Toshinori's friend arrives. She said, before looking at Izuku with a glare. And once he leaves we will be discussing what you should do if you find yourself in this situation again. 2 days after finding ERI. So pretty. Said an odd ERI watching as Inko finished with Izuku's hair, the slime now dressed in a gothic style dress, his hair done up into 2 ponytails that curled at the ends. Thanks ERI. Izuku said with a tired but sincere smile, before giving Inko an exasperated look. How many outfits did you buy? He looked at the stack of clothing he'd tried on, and then to the still bigger pile of bags on the ground. You know half of them are for ERI. She said, taking some pictures with her phone. I would have had you try them on at the store, but you're under house arrest until the police are sure the guy you call Birdie isn't looking for human you. She said, her tone making Izuku shiver slightly. Besides, consider this punishment for acting without thinking. She said, putting her phone away before patting ERI's head gently, the small girl looking up at her with curious eyes. Now let's see what you like. She said with a smile as the girl, a small frown flashing across her face as the girl seemed to try and imitate her smile, only to be unable to. Izuku watched as his mom went through the bags of clothes picking and choosing what outfit she thought would suit ERI, his mind flashing back to after the police had decided to leave ERI in Inko's care for the time being, till a more permanent solution could be found. That night. Izuku, I don't agree with you trying to be a hero when you're not one yet. His mom whispered as they stood just outside his room, eyes fixed on ERI sleeping on his bed, holding slime copy Izuku clothes. But, I will say I am proud that you got that little girl away from that monster. She said, the look in her eyes firm as steel. I'll try to think things through next time. Izuku whispered back. It's just. I was already moving before I could think about what could go wrong. I mean, I thought about it during, but. She asked for help. He smiled softly, looking his mom in the eyes. I couldn't let her get hurt. He said, before looking at the door to their guest room. I did try and contact you too. Izuku said, getting a guilty look from his mother. Well, after watching the entrance exam footage with you in it. She said, voice filled with mirth. I figured it would be best if I was there when he talked to the principal about you. She said. Though he seemed adamant about you receiving your test results in the mail, and I was helping Toshinori with his videos. The man can showboat. She said with a sig before fixing Izuku with a look. He did seem pretty excited about what you did with the zero-pointer. She said, fixing Izuku with a look that made him chuckle and rub the back of his head. My body moved on its own. He said, the tone at the end making it sound like a question as his mom sighed. I know Izuku, but you have to think things through sometimes. I know you do a lot of the time, but one time is all it takes for something bad to happen. She paused before looking Izuku in the eyes. I saw Toshinori's wound and all I could imagine is if you were in the same situation Izuku. She said, voice serious as Izuku gulped at her tone. But Izuku moved to say something only to be cut off by the look Inko was giving him. I know what you're going to say Izuku, and I'm not trying to say you can't be a hero. She said, her eyes softening. I mean I don't think I could stop you even if I wanted to. She gestured to ERI sleeping in the bed, you made that pretty clear tonight. She paused swallowing before looking at Izuku with a serious look in her eyes. I know how dangerous it can be for heroes, I've seen the news and seeing what happened to Toshinori. To All Might, I want to say this to you. She swallowed again, placing her hands on Izuku's shoulders and making sure he was looking her in the eyes. If you ever find yourself in a situation like you did today, a villain is trying to hurt you or kill you and your quirk won't stop it from happening, if you have to choose between being a hero and surviving. Izuku, I want you to survive. She said, her tone firm as Izuku's eyes widened at her words. Mom? Izuku muttered with wide eyes as his mom continued to look into his eyes with an unwavering resolve. Promise me Izuku. She said, voice firm and brokering no argument. I want you to promise me if it comes to saving yourself or saving others you won't hesitate. She pulled him into a hug, making Izuku realize his mom was shaking. Promise me. She whispered. I promise. Izuku said, hugging his mom back, realizing that one of the best things about getting his sense back as a human was the warmth of his mother's hug and the fact that he could hug her back. Present. Aizu? Said ERI, pulling Izuku from his thought as he focused on what was in front of him, ERI now dressed in an outfit similar to his. How do I look? She asked, wide eyes looking into his as he smiled and let out a chuckle, patting ERI's head gently as to not ruin her hair. Very pretty ERI. Izuku said before his mom had them stand together so she could take pictures of the matching pair. You two look like sisters. Inko said, cooing at the sight of them both. I can't wait to see how Mitsuki reacts to these. She said, making Izuku sign, knowing that once his mom and Mitsuki started competing he and ERI would be their dress-up dolls for quite a while, having them do the same thing to Bakugo when he was younger. Sister? ERI asked as Inko started looking through the bags, Izuku noticing All Might trying his best to sneak out of the apartment, probably hoping to skip the breakfast Inko had been making forcing him to eat during his stay. Izuku and All Might's eyes met, the number one hero shaking his head and making a praying gesture while Izuku smirked, a look that once again brought up painful and humiliating memories for the number one hero. Why don't you ask Toshinori? Izuku asked ERI, pointing at the number one hero who froze as ERI, and Inko turned to look at the still as a statue hero. ERI had been afraid of his skeletal look at first, but once learning he'd been training Izuku to be a hero she'd softened up to him, and the candied apples he brought home for the small girl every day helped. The hero looked nervously at Inko who smirked, a plate full of food floating behind her, making the number one hero gulp in fear. 1 week after exam. Izuku hummed to himself dressed in a shirt and shorts with his hair down as he wrote down notes in his hero journal, ERI sitting at his side, trying to hum along as she drew in a notebook just like his, minus all the stickers Inko had bought for her when she learned ERI had never used them before. Izuku, it's here. Shouted Inko, with a smile as she brought in the mail. Izuku seemed to disappear, then reappear holding the letter as Inko gave him a look. What did I say about practicing one for all in the house? She asked, getting a sheepish shrug from Izuku. Not to. He muttered, getting a nod from Inko before she gestured at the letter in his hand. Well? Are you gonna open it? She asked, Izuku's smile returning to his face as he opened the letter, turning it over and letting a metal disc land on his desk, ERI looking at it curious eyes, before jumping slightly as it projected a video, showing that it was a hologram disc, the image of a white mouse bear thing appearing getting ERI's attention. Am I a bear, a mouse or a dog? I'm Principal Nezu of the UA High School, and I am happy to welcome you young slime to your hero academia. The principal said, before images of the exam started to play from his struggle of running, which got giggles from ERI, to his eating of the zero-pointer, before turning to a scoreboard with his name with a score of 74. Izuku Midoriya, you earned 74 villain points, a score that would already make you eligible for enrollment in the school's hero course. However, how could such a prestigious school such as mine deny access to those willing to throw aside their scores in favor of helping others? The images changed to show how even when ragdolling he'd managed to incapacitate robots that then allowed others to get points, then turning back to a smiling Nezu. Even if by what looked to be accidents you managed to help quite a bit of student, even with some point deducted due to your run-ins with another examine who appeared to be too busy focusing on female examinees and running from your acrobatic attempts to get points. While interfering with another examinee's examination would be grounds for dismissal of your application, we found that it was warranted due to the behavior shown by said student. Nezu took a drink of tea. I have also been informed by both All Might and your mother of your circumstances, and would like to assure you that UA's faculties are open to all students in need of improvement. However, I believe we have gone off topic, so let me congratulate you on obtaining the highest rank in UA's practical exam, he said, the board changing to reflect the scores of examinees to include hero points. I have also taken the liberty of having you provided with both the male and female uniforms, as been asked to by your mother. A glint appeared in Nezu's eyes that briefly reminded Izuku of his mom. Do with them as you like, he said, pausing for a second before nodding to himself. Also inform your mother that I will contact her soon on the birdie situation, as All Might has called it. I look forward to what you will do, he said before the message ended. Izuku was quickly pulled into a hug by his mother. I'm so proud of you, she said, squeezing his tightly, a wide smile on her face. As ERI poked the disc with a look of concentration on her face, Izuku chuckled as he patted her head. I'll make something special for dinner tonight, Inko said, pulling away from Izuku with wet eyes and a smile on her face. Is Toshinori coming? Izuku asked, making his mother smirk. He will be, she said with a chuckle and glint in her eyes that made Izuku for just a moment feel sorry for his mentor, only for it to be squished by the humor he felt when remembering the look of defeat on the pro hero's face after being forced to eat 3 meals a day for only 4 days by his mother before his door had been fixed. Izuku was pulled from his thoughts as the hologram of Principal Nezu started back up, with ERI trying her best to pat the image of the principal, a pout on her face as she failed to, looking at Izuku with a pleading look in her eyes. Why can't I pet the puppy? She asked, making Izuku and Inko both pat her head, barely holding back from laughing. Sorry ERI, Izuku said, still patting her head. But you can't pet the principal. But if you want I can get you a stuffed toy of the principal, he asked, the girl's eyes shining, though a smile was still a bit too hard for the girl to do. Really? Yeah. Izuku chuckling. I think UA sells them, he said, remembering seeing some stuffed toys of Nezu advertised during one of the sports festivals, though it had been overshadowed by a student flashing the camera due to their quirk. 3 days before the start of UA. Well done my boy, All Might said as Izuku picked himself off the floor, a smile on his face as his body sparked, quirk flowing through his body. I'd say you're able to use about 20% before one for all before it's too much and it overwhelms you. Thanks, Izuku said, still smiling as the number 1 hero was engulfed in smoke, returning to his natural form before turning his attention to his hand opening and closing it before bouncing lightly on his feet, the glow from his quirk disappearing as he turned it off before his smile became sheepish. Hopefully this training will stop me from becoming a pinball again. He winced, remembering his mom's reaction to what was now called by All Might the slime ball of doom. All Might laughed at the expression on Izuku's face, having guessed at what the slime was thinking, patting his successor's head while letting out a chuckle. Come on now, I think it could be a great ultimate move, he said, a smirk on his face as he gestured to his car before making his way to it, the slime following after a brief moment of one for all activating, as the training clothes Izuku was wearing were instantly replaced by a shirt saying shirt on it and a pair of jeans, followed by the coat he'd liberated from All Might, burying his face in the fluff of the collar. Still not over the wonder that is fluff before being pulled from it by the shutter sound from All Might's phone as he took a picture of Izuku nuzzling the collar. Tashi, Izuku said, eyes narrowed as he started the number 1 hero, who froze like the deer in the headlights as an image of his master flashed to the forefront of his mind at the look Izuku was giving him. Sorry young Midoriya, the number 1 said, texted the photo to Inko. But, I fear your mother too much to not send it, he said, paling slightly as he remembered the talk she'd had with him the second Izuku had gone off to take the entrance exams. The slime hero in training let out a sigh, knowing that he was now in for another session as his mother's dress-up doll. As they made it to All Might's car, the slime siding into the passenger seat as his mentor slid into the driver's side, starting it and then giving Izuku an apologetic look. I apologize that I won't be able to monitor your training for a while, he said, rubbing the back of his neck before pulling off into the street, eyes on the road as he talked. You're making great progress and I don't want yo. Don't worry. Izuku leaned back in his seat looking out at cars passing by. I know that you've got to prepare lessons and do the paperwork as a teacher at UA. The slime let out a sigh. I'd like to train with you more, but I understand. He shrugged, knowing that All Might could see it out the corner of his eye. Besides, once I'm a student I can use the training grounds at the school without worrying about being arrested for public quirk use or accidentally getting lost at sea. or just exploding a beach. True. All Might chuckled lightly as he drove. Both UA's training facilities and teachers are the best. He said, paying when he said teachers, making Izuku give me a look. What? The slime asked. I had the opportunity to go over the files of the other teachers due to my situation. All Might said, eyes still focused on the road. I really shouldn't say anything. But be prepared for anything on the first day. He said, sparing a quick glance at Izuku before focusing back on the road. Izuku looked at All Might curiously before shrugging. No, the pro could keep a secret when he wanted to, turning his attention to watch the cars pass by before a smirk slowly worked its way across his face. Really? Izuku asked, recognizing the street they were on and store they were pulling up on, sending All Might an amused look. You know my mom is going to get angry if you buy ERI sweets every time you come over. It's sort of a tradition. All Might said nervously, pulling into the store's parking lot. ERI's been living with at the apartment for a month. Izuku said, sending the hero an unamused look. I don't think that's fast enough to form a tradition. Really? All Might said, eyebrow raised as he parked the car, turning it off. You've bought ERI every hero plush on the market. And some I didn't even know they made. The number one said. I mean, how did you even get a limited edition Eraserhead one? I didn't even know Underground Heroes had that kind of merchandise. I made a deal with Nezu. Izuku said, making All Might freeze as he got out of the car, staring at the slime with wide eyes. A deal? A deal with Nezu? All Might asked, getting a smirk and nod from Izuku as he closed his door. With him on Saturdays during the first semester of school and access to all my hero notebooks. Izuku said. How did he? My mom and he have been talking about ERI's situation and about the kind of help we can give her. He frowned. She's not scared of my quirk or moms, but whenever we bring up her she freezes. Izuku played with some of his hair, twirling it between his fingers. Hound Dog has stopped by to talk with her because of his work as a guidance counselor, and it's helped. But she still can't smile. All Might asked, the duo making their way into the store. No. Izuku said, with a sigh. Though she stopped wearing the bandages and hasn't woken up in the middle of the night, so at least it seems like she's getting better. Don't worry, my boy. All Might said, a smile on his face. I'm sure you and your mom will help her smile again, just give it time. I know. But Izuku looked forward, eyes narrowing as he looked at nothing. I really wish I'd punched Birdie in the face. All Might let out a small chuckle, patting Izuku's shoulder as they made their way to the candy aisle of the store. Any news on them? Izuku asked, eyes scanning the shelves, still getting used to having the ability to taste, looking for new flavors to try. All Might shook his head, picking through the candy and grabbing the apple-flavored ones he thought ERI would enjoy. Sir says they've gone completely underground, whatever they were trying to do ended when you grabbed ERI. He frowned, letting out a sigh. And I don't think he'll be sharing anything even if they do pop back up. Izuku gave All Might a curious look, the hero sighing again, looking around to make sure no one was close enough to overhear. He has made it abundantly clear that he believes I've made the wrong choice with who to trust with One for All. His eyes narrowed. We had some words about my quirk. He ran a hand through his hair and let out another sigh of frustration. Izuku rolled his eyes, flicking All Might's arm to pull him from his thoughts, gesturing towards where the registers were. You know, if you're all moody when we get to the apartment, Mom will think you stopped eating the meal she sent with me. He said, making the number one hero pale at the thought of what Inko would do to him if she thought he wasn't eating. True. He said, before looking at Izuku with curiosity. Did you ever decide on your hero costume? He asked, getting a smirk from Izuku. Nope. He said, pouting when All Might didn't react to it. Instead, he got a raised brow as they handed the candy they'd grabbed to the cashier. Yeah, well, I figured since I can store emergency supplies and such in my stomach I'd go light, so right now it's just black reinforced clothing that can handle when I use my quirk, and a copy of this jacket made of the same material. He patted the jacket fondly. All Might nodded, passing his money to the cashier before handing the bags to Izuku, who stored them in his stomach once they were outside the store. Reinforced clothing is definitely a must. All Might said, a fond smile on his face as they made their way to the car. I remember the struggle Dave went through trying to make a cloth that could handle 100% of my quirk. He let out a laugh. I swear I'd be in debt if it wasn't for the fibers he created for my costume. You know, you've never told me about David's shield. Izuku said, as they got in the car. What's he like? Well, he works on Island and he has a daughter around your age. All Might smiled fondly as he talked. She's quirkless, but that's not stopping her from being one of the best support item suppliers. He paused, humming to himself before looking at Izuku, a look of mischief in his eyes. Do you know if the Expo is this year? That's it, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. With that, take care.